Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to show you some of Bobby Fischer's famous games. In these games, there will be some attacking elements, but I would like to focus on the defensive skills in this lesson. Here we go. This is the first example, and this is a game between two former world champions, Bobby Fischer and Vasily Smyslov. Right now, it is Black's turn to move, and White has some very clear threats, such as capturing the pawn on h6 using the pin, or using the pin by pushing the pawn up to h4, or even sacrificing a rook and then developing a mating attack with the queen. So therefore, Black needs to be really careful right now what to do. As it is typically in situations when you need to be on the defense, you may bring a piece to defend, to aid the defense, or you can try to run away. Let's see how things would work if Black would try to go for the run, meaning running with the king to the other side of the board. Well, it would not work out too well because White could still capture the bishop on g5 based on the tactic that if now pawn takes rook, then queen h8 checkmates. Things are not quite as bad for Black, but Black's advantage would be gone even after the better queen d3 move. Queen d3, of course, threatens immediately the white rook on f1, but now White would continue with queen takes pawn, king e8, and could just move the rook away to g1. It's still a complex position, but with approximately balanced chances. Let's go back and look at the position with a fresh eye. First of all, let's establish who is ahead at the moment, or at least by the basics, that is, with the material balance. Well, if we look, we'll see that each side has a queen and two rooks. However, Black has an extra bishop. That's the only minor piece on the board. So that is to Black's favor. In addition, there are 5 pawns on each side as well. Obviously, the challenge is that the Black king is in an insecure position, missing the g-pawn in front of it, and White has a dangerous pawn on f6 that, of course, is a serious aid to White's attack. And, of course, the pin that we already talked about earlier, that the bishop on g5 is in a pin. The good news is that it is Black's turn, and therefore Black can defend here successfully if they find the correct defense. It's also crucial to recognize that White has a back rank problem. What that means is that the white rook that's on f1 is actually tied down to the back rank to defend the king. And that is exactly what allows now Black the correct defense, and that is to play queen f5. Beautiful move. Brings the queen to the king's side to help the defense. Of course, also attacks the white rook on f1, and the queen is taboo because if right now rook takes queen, Black would checkmate within a couple of moves. Let's see how the game continued after Smyslov's beautiful queen f5 move. White moved his king to protect the rook, but before we go further, let's check for a moment how should Black continue if the queen would retreat protecting the rook. Of course, Black is already a bishop up, as we know. However, White has plans to play h4 in the upcoming near future and win that bishop back. So therefore, it's quite important to look for the optimal way to play here for black. And black actually, again, using the back rank weakness of white, has a very elegant combination to his disposal and to transpose the game to an easily won endgame. Well, that combination is sacrificing the queen and then simply doubling up the rooks on the b file. What happens now is that the black rook is unavoidably coming down to b1, which means that the white queen will be lost for the rook, right? White may play h4, but the rook arrives to b1 anyway, pinning the queen. The queen has no escape. And then white's problem is that the e-pawn will simply run away and become a queen real quick, even though white will win the bishop on g5. Again, let's return to the game continuation. Bobby Fischer continued by playing king to g1, protecting the rook. At this point already, the black queen is in danger because after a potential check on b1, the white rook could simply retreat to f1 and win. So now the black queen needs to go, and of course it wants to go to g6. As we mentioned in several other lessons, whenever we're ahead in material and our opponent is attacking, our primary goal should be trying to exchange queens or other attacking pieces. Naturally, white wants to avoid the exchange of the queens. If white would trade, the attack would definitely be over. So therefore, the queen rather retreated to e2, still at least maintaining the h4 threat. White cannot really prevent that from coming, but can optimize the situation that arises after that. In addition to the way that Smyslov chose, perhaps even better, more accurate way would be to again double up the rooks. So after h4, black could respond by playing rook b2, attacking the queen. And the reason why that's important, so after when the queen runs away, the e-pawn can real quick advance and move all the way to e2, attacking the white rook. And after rook e1, rook b1. So as you can see, black is playing extremely energetically, not leaving white the time to develop his attack further. If right now queen takes pawn, then rook takes, queen takes, and the pin arrives from rook b1. And the problem for white is that after pawn takes, that would also create a pin over the black queen. Black comes first by capturing the white queen with a check. Let's go back a tiny bit. After e3, we were looking at the line pawn takes, e2, rook e1, rook b1. And this was the moment where we investigated queen takes pawn on e2. But instead, let's look at king f2 for a moment. And now black will start a king chase. As I keep mentioning over and over, when a king is stuck in the middle of the board, as long as there are queens in the game still, it's usually a very sad prospect. Rook b1 check. Black doesn't mind losing the e2 pawn because now the chase keeps continuing. Queen c2, king f3, check. If king goes to e2, then there is a skewer, winning the white queen immediately on c4. On the other hand, if the king goes to e3, then simply giving the right checks with the queen and the rook sooner than later will result in checkmate. As we saw in the previous variation, rook cb5 may have been somewhat more accurate, but of course Smyslov's rook c6 does the job as well. h4 anyway, rook takes pawn, white traded, took back, and now white played queen h5 in hopes that on the following move pawn will take and rook will take and white will develop some counterattack. Again, at this moment, black didn't make the most accurate move, although we have to remember that at this point Smyslov was short on time. This was move 37, and in those days the time controls typically were that you had to make 40 moves in a certain amount of time, I believe in this tournament in 2.5 hours. And very often among grandmasters, when they have a lot of challenges to solve during a game, by the time they reach move 30, 35, or 37 in this case, they are extremely low on time. They oftentimes have a couple of minutes or 5 to 10 minutes to make all those moves. And usually that's exactly when the peak height of the game is, of challenges, of difficulties to solve. So therefore we often see inaccuracies even from world champions or very top players. And of course it's very easy for me to say with the help of a silicon friend and without the pressure of the clock ticking and the pressure of winning or losing the game. But objectively speaking, e3 was a somewhat better move, because after pawn takes, queen f2 would come, and e2. Now black is about to promote a pawn to a queen, and white's attack dies out, because now black can simply give up one queen, but make a new one. And black is up a rook, and the black queen would simply retreat for the defense of the king and win easily. Of course, the game move wasn't bad either. It resulted a winning rook endgame. Smyslov played queen to f4, attacking the rook, king h2, king g7, pawn takes, pawn takes. Now, very importantly, the white rook is pinned, therefore it cannot capture on g5. In the meantime, black is also threatening to pin the white queen. So white had no choice but take the pawn, but that meant no more queens. And of course, without the queens, the attack is over. Now this is a fork attacking the king and the pawn. Therefore, the king needs to move to f6. Now let's evaluate this position for a moment before we see the final moves of the game. It's a rook endgame where black has one extra pawn. I have to say that an extra pawn in a rook endgame does not always guarantee a win. However, in this case it does, because black has a pretty far advanced passed pawn already and has the momentum going for it. Came rook h5, and now very good move, rook b1, keeping the white king away from the first rank, which will be important in the attempt of trying to stop black's e-pawn. And after king g3, another very important move, rook to f1, again keeping now the white king away from the f-file. And now the road of the e-pawn is paved out. Came rook h4, king f5. Because otherwise, if e3, then the rook appears behind the pawn and catches it. So king f5, much better choice. Rook h5, king e6. Now, if rook h4, then the two pawns can connect simply by playing f5. Rook h6, f6, rook h4, and here, as I said, the pawns could connect by playing f5, but Smyslov found an even more precise way by advancing the pawn, and after rook e4, f5. A very fine move, because now, if rook takes pawn, then f4 forks. A very fine game by Smyslov. Now let's look at a next example where we'll see Bobby Fischer on the attack. His opponent is Letellier, and this is a game from 1960. Now, this is also a good example to demonstrate that even in endgames where there are not that many pieces left other than pawns on the board, there are still attacking opportunities and dangers. Well, let's see first of all the game, what happened. Right now, black has an extra pawn, although they are doubled. Black has two pawns on the b file and on the f file as well, so therefore one of the 7 pawns that black has is only considered, so to say, half a pawn. However, it can make the difference, as we shall see what happened in the game. In the game, white captured the pawn, which was a greedy move and a losing move right away. I suggest try to imagine that you're playing instead of Bobby Fischer and see what you would play right now to win the game. Bobby played King A5. It's a rare occasion when the king becomes the hero. The king becomes a vital attacking piece. Now the threat is obvious. For example, if rook would take the pawn, bishop a4 check, followed by b3. A beautiful checkmate, a very optimal cooperation between the black pieces. Okay, let's go back. And in the game, white continued by playing King a2. Very logical move, trying to run away from the threat. Now, if black is careless and follows the same way by playing bishop a4, that's too slow, would give white the time to defend successfully by playing b3 and only then on a following move capture the pawn on f6. But black can do better, and again, try to figure out what is the correct continuation of the attack here. It's pretty brilliant. Bobby Fischer gave up a pawn with a check, but gains time. King takes, and now the bishop arrives to a4 with a check. King a2, and comes King b4, threatening with checkmate. The only way white can help that is by giving a pawn up, which he did. Bishop captured, King b2. Still not over, black needs to make precise moves in order to win the game. Rook d1. Attacking the white bishop. If the white bishop would go to c2, the problem is the pin arriving from rook d2. Let's go back. The game continued with bishop b1, and now rook d2, forcing the king to the back rank. And the problem would be very similar whether the king goes to a1 or c1. King came to a1 in the game, and black continues with king c3, just as black would have if the white king went to c1. In that case, the checkmate threat would have came from a3, and in this case, it still comes from there, but in 2 moves, coming a3 and b2. For example, after rook takes pawn, bishop a3, threatening with the checkmate. Bishop moves, clearing the b1 square, check, and followed by Checkmate. Very beautiful game by Bobby Fischer. But let's go back and try to see what indeed his opponent should have done not to lose the game. Let's first look at an aggressive move such as Rook d8, which seems to skewer up the two black bishops. That would not quite work well either, not as bad as taking the pawn, but still wouldn't solve the real problems. Black will gain time and move back the king to c7, attacking the white rook, Rook h8, and play Rook a1, again creating a checkmate threat with Bishop a4. King c2, and then Black would go and attack the pawn on h2. Now, if Rook h6 takes, Black maintains his extra pawn thanks to the pin on the second rank. Or, if Knight f3, protecting the pawn, then again a very important aggressive tactical move for Black, e5, threatening with the fork, maintaining Black's advantage. Let's retreat again to the starting position. So what should White do here? Actually, the correct move is to play Knight f3. That's the best choice, maintaining the pressure, the threat on the pawn on h6, protecting the h2 pawn, and in the knight bringing an 8 for the defense against those mating attacks. For example, if king a5 right now, the rook is still in place to chase the black king back. So as you see, there are always defensive resources and have to be lookout for the opponent's threats. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this endgame, White has a challenge which pawn to push. Should he push the b pawn first, the one that's attacked, or the a pawn? Well, it's a serious dilemma because one of them wins and the other one allows Black to draw the game. If White would simply move back and protect the pawn, that would allow the black king to walk in towards the corner of the board, and in that case the game would be a draw very easily. Of course, as we know, if even Black would give up his bishop for the pawn and reach the crucial c7 or c8 square in such positions, the black king will arrive to the corner and the game will be a simple draw. Let's first see why b5 would be a mistake. In that case, after king d8, king b7, king d7, b6, Black could draw the game by playing bishop a5 and then simply capture the pawn, and the king reached the c8 square, which reaches a theoretical drawn endgame. Therefore, the only correct way to win is to push the a pawn and keep pushing it. Unluckily for Black, capturing the pawn already would not allow Black to catch the pawn as it advances. And now bishop f2, because after king c8, a7, the pawn is unstoppable. King b7, king d7, b5, king d8, and a7, and White simply won. It's amazing that an endgame with so little material still requires so much accuracy and delicacy. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you learned some from Bobby Fischer's games and enjoyed the jewel of the week. So long, until the next lesson.